Have you heard from your ex? Since your divorce, one of the women at the table asked Brooke while sipping her drink from a fancy glass. The ladies were comfortably sitting on the terrace of the Travelers Inn. Brooke Paquette considered the question before answering. No, since I asked him to leave and filed for divorce, I haven't seen or heard from him. He tried to talk to the children, but they ignored him after I explained what he did to us. Ale, a newcomer in the group, wondered out loud, was it a bad break? I sensed that it still hurts. When did the divorce happen? A year ago. He fought against it for a year. But when he saw that the children didn't want anything to do with him anymore, he gave up, signed the papers, and left. He's been gone for 2 years in total. Good riddance, Brooke said, with anger in her voice. The next question from Ally was expected. Why did you get a divorce? Divorce him, you mean? Because he was unfaithful with his first love, Gemma Evans. From behind them, they heard a voice saying, Jake Vandam, cheating? Not possible. He's not that type of person. And if he cheated with me, I would remember that. Trust me, it's impossible. I think you're just playing one of your little tricks again. Brooke turned around quickly, shocked by the unexpected voice. She said, well, look who's here. You have some nerve. Look who's talking. You manipulated Jake when we were still together. Your lies caused our breakup, and now you're claiming that Jake cheated on you with me. When did that happen? Gemma retorted. 2 years ago. As you know very well, if Brooke's voice had claws, Gemma would be bleeding. Oh no. If I had been with Jake, I would remember. 2 years ago, I was 5,000 miles away in Edinburgh, Scotland. I was studying and tutoring non-English students. I can prove it more convincingly than you can prove your claims. I just got back a week ago after being away for 3 years, and before that, I was teaching at a high school on the other side of the country. Brooke turned pale. That scenario was not what she had expected, and it was very bad news for her. If it wasn't MS Evans, then who did your ex cheat on you with? Brooke, now cornered, snapped. He cheated on me and I kicked him out. Gemma wasn't done yet and replied, and I think that in your efforts to destroy him, you made it impossible for him to live here anymore. Even his parents were fooled by your tricks. I don't believe for a second that he cheated, but I believe he saw through you. Are those children even his? One wonders. But I must go. I have things to do, people to talk to. Jake's parents, for example. Brooke turned pale again. You better not. I'll make your life miserable here. Gemma looked calmly at Brooke, smirked, and said, Life hasn't treated you kindly, has it? You need a lot of makeup to make yourself presentable. Anyway, save your threats. Tomorrow, I leave for my new job and I won't be coming back to this toxic environment. So go sulk. With that, Gemma walked to her car and drove straight to the Vandam residence. The stately house was exactly as she remembered. 3 parking spots at the gate. Just behind the gate, 2 giant ginkgo biloba trees, planted by Jake's great-great-grandparents when they got married and built the house. The shaded walkway to the house and the 3 wide granite steps to the door. Gemma got out of her car, opened the trunk to take out her laptop, and walked to the door. She knocked and waited. Jake's grandfather opened the door. Yes, young lady, good afternoon, Mr. Vandam. I'm Gemma Evans. Do you remember me? It's been a long time. Yes, I remember you. Wasn't your name mentioned in that unpleasantness with Jake's marriage? Yes, sir. I'm here to tell you that it was impossible for Jake to have an affair with me. I can prove that I was in Edinburgh at the time. The old man looked at Gemma carefully, weighing her words. Gemma felt like her soul was laid bare by his gaze. Finally, he said, Call me Rufus. The older one, he said with a twinkle in his eyes. Yes, it's good and brave of you to come here. My son and daughter-in-law believe Jake is guilty, but I don't. He's not capable of that. May I ask why you want to prove his innocence? Gemma had a strong feeling that this man could detect any lie, and lying to him would be disrespectful. So she replied honestly, Jake doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to be the next Mrs. Vandam. But first, I need to find him. Do you happen to know where he is, Rufus? The old man's eyes sparkled mischievously as he replied, He doesn't have any contact with his parents, brother or sister, but I can tell you, in confidence, that he is in St. Christopher's Crossing, doing very well for himself at the university over there. But beware, you didn't hear it from me. Now, let's keep this our little secret. Don't spoil the fun, no sir. I'll let you in on another secret. I've accepted a job at that same university, so I'm bound to run into him anyway." From the back of the house, a voice called out, "Dad?" "Who is it?" "Don't let them sell you something," Rufus Sr. grinned and said to Gemma, "Do you know where the kitchen is?" Gemma nodded, but as she turned around, she almost bumped into Jake's mother. "You have some nerve," she shouted, "ruining my son's marriage and then walking into this house uninvited." "Out you go," Jake's granddad immediately interfered, growling, "Anna, she is my guest and I will listen to her. She claims to have been abroad during this whole incident." Anna Vandam deflated immediately, looking at Gemma. "What? I don't believe you." Gemma lifted her laptop, smiled at Rufus Sr., and said, "I'll show you." An hour later, a very distraught mother and an extremely angry old man stared at Gemma. "What now?" Anna whispered. Gemma, once again, chose honesty. "I don't know. Tomorrow, I leave this place. Jake and I were close friends, and we could have become more if Brooke didn't intervene." Gemma told her story of how she lost her friend and soulmate to Brooke. She didn't disclose her suspicions about the sudden pregnancy. That was for Jake to find out if she could find him. Anna was appalled by the schemes of the mother of her grandchildren. She decided that her husband, Jack Jr., needed to meet Gemma as well. Kindly, she asked, "Would you like to stay for dinner, my dear? I'd also like you to tell Randall, my husband, your tale." Gemma politely declined, stating that she had to get ready for her new job. She deliberately didn't mention where her new job was. When Gemma said her goodbyes, Anna pulled her aside for a moment. "Gemma, if or when you find Jake, will you let us know? We made the wrong decisions and treated him poorly back then. I want my youngest back." Gemma replied gently, "If or better, when I find him, I will pass on the message, but I won't disclose his whereabouts. Jake disappeared for a reason, and it's clear that he doesn't want to be found." With that, she walked to her car. Halfway there, she saw a man approaching. "Oh no, Jake's brother," flashed through her mind. She observed the man. He was way past his prime, getting very overweight. He had a rolling gait like a gorilla, and his appearance matched that description. Gemma thought to herself, he needs a different style, but what amazing legs. I wish I had legs like that. He walked into the house and met his granddad. "We had a visitor? I saw that woman walking to the gate." Rufus Sr. kept a blank expression on his face as he replied, "Yes, that was an old friend of Jake, wanting to reconnect, but we don't know where he lives, do we? That good-for-nothing cheater." Young Rufus said, all the while thinking, "Keep up the act. I still want him out of the picture and as far away as possible." He went upstairs straight into his apartment, which was created for him after his accident. Brooke, meanwhile, was contemplating her life. When the divorce was finalized, Jacob, also known as Jake, was 35 and she was 2 years older. Their children were now 16 and 15 years old, born within a year of each other. It wasn't that they had met each other in a conventional way. Brooke had noticed Jake, who was only 18 at the time, during a 10-kilometer swim race. At first, she didn't pay much attention to him until she saw a girl helping him out of his wetsuit. That caught her interest. Suddenly, he looked incredibly attractive. She closely observed the two of them. He had reddish-brown hair, green eyes, and a handsome face. He had a strong, athletic physique. She decided that she wanted to get to know him better, even if the girl with him was his girlfriend. It took Brooke 6 months to break through Jake's shyness. Luckily, his friend, who wasn't his girlfriend anymore, moved away, making it easier for Brooke to spend time with him. Finally, Jake invited her to meet his family at their monthly family barbecue. Brooke discovered that he was the youngest of 3 siblings. His brother was 6 years older and his sister was 4 years older. At the barbecue, Brooke noticed the striking differences between Jake and his brother. Rufus, his brother, had a much larger muscular build compared to Jake's more slender physique. He also had a more boisterous and showy personality. Rufus took an interest in Brooke, trying to win her over. After 2 weeks of giving her attention and gifts, they ended up in a hotel room together. It wasn't a pleasant experience for Brooke. She decided to tell Jake the truth about what had happened with his brother Rufus. Brooke approached Jake and confessed everything. He was understanding and told her she could say that Jake was the father, or they could find a doctor to address the situation. Jake regretfully mentioned that it would have been better if she had taken precautions. They both decided that pretending Jake was the father would be the best option. A month later, Brooke realized that she missed her period. When she confronted Rufus, he was unsympathetic and told her she should have taken better precautions. Feeling uncertain, Brooke decided to approach Jake and see if they could build a future together. Brooke found herself lying in a hotel room bed with Jake. She was unsure about what to expect, but Jake surprised her with his tenderness. He took the time to pleasure her and catered to her needs, unlike Rufus. She realized that there was a stark difference between their lovemaking. As Brooke explored Jake's body, she was astounded by his size. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement, unsure of how it would fit. But Jake reassured her and wiped her face with a damp cloth, showing care and consideration. They took their time before they engaged in intimate activity. Brooke marveled at how she could handle Jake compared to Rufus. She learned that satisfaction and pleasure in the bedroom were not just physical, but emotional as well. Years later, Jake and Brooke got married and lived happily together. They had found a balance in their relationship, where Jake was a loving partner and Brooke still had Rufus as a lover on the side. Although it wasn't perfect, it worked for them. 13 years later, Rufus faced consequences for his reckless lifestyle. The excessive use of muscle-enhancing substances led to a severe heart condition. He collapsed in the gym, luckily with a nurse nearby who performed CPR until help arrived. Rufus was rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered that his heart had been damaged due to his prolonged steroid use. He had to undergo surgery to address the issue. After being discharged from the hospital, Rufus faced a new reality. He was no longer the muscular man he used to be, and his health was in a poor state. He needed constant care for an extended period of time. Over the following months, Rufus began manipulating Brooke, convincing her that she deserved better than their current financial situation and that Jake should provide more for her. He played the victim and exaggerated his suffering. Slowly but surely, Rufus's campaign started to affect Brooke. She began to change her behavior towards Jake in negative ways. She would often nag him and demand more from him. This change in dynamic was difficult for Jake, who had always been patient and caring towards Brooke. One day, in the middle of one of Brooke's rants, Jake reached his breaking point. He walked away and sought solace in his home office. Brooke followed, expecting him to engage in an argument, but instead he firmly told her to leave. Frustrated and taken aback, Brooke entered the office to confront Jake, but he lashed out at her and told her to go away. That moment, Brooke realized that Jake had reached his breaking point, and if she kept pushing, he would retaliate. What she didn't fully understand, even after being married to Jake for almost 15 years, was that he had a tendency to absorb punches until he couldn't take it anymore. Only when he was pushed to the edge would he react. With men like Jake, their reactions could be explosive and unpredictable. Looking into the pain that Brooke had caused him, Jake knew he had to protect himself. He had reached his limit and couldn't handle it anymore. From a young age, Jake knew that Rufus would inherit the family company. It was a successful business in the aircraft industry, providing specially designed parts for airplanes that needed to perform above standard safety levels. Jake himself had impressive credentials in aeronautics and industrial design. His grandfather had groomed him to be the future technical executive officer. However, when his father took over the company, he pushed Jake aside. Jake suspected that his brother played a role in this decision, but he didn't let it bother him too much. He already had more work than he could handle. When his father fired him on a technicality, he tried to make Jake sign a document preventing him from working for the competition. Jake laughed in his face, walked out, hugged his father's secretary on the cheek, and sang the iconic words from Tommy by The Who, "I'm free, I'm free." And free. In freedom tastes of reality as he left the house. When a major competitor learned about Jake's layoff, they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He took it eagerly, realizing the benefits were even better than what he had at his father's company. Now he worked 28 hours a week for the same salary he had before, but with better perks. Jake, always anticipating that his father and brother would try to get rid of him, had started his own company based in Luxembourg. All his freelance work went through this company, with the majority of the income going into an offshore account for legal purposes. Brooke never questioned where the extra money came from, just assuming that Jake was doing additional work on the side. This setup became incredibly convenient when Jake decided he needed more quality time with his children. he made the decision to stop working such long hours. The next morning, Jake was reading the newspaper on his tablet while sipping his usual cup of coffee when Brooke walked into the kitchen. She asked impatiently, "Where were you all night?" "I've been waiting for you," with a sigh, Jake replied. "Sure, but you only waited for about 5 minutes before falling asleep. Don't be so cynical." Jake retorted, "I'm just stating the truth. But before you get angry, I need to say something." Brooke held her tongue, waiting for him to continue. "I worked about 30 days straight, with no days off, just to fulfill your demands. I haven't spent more than 4 hours with our kids during that time. That's going to change now. I've returned all my freelance assignments and now only work 30 hours a week. If you want more, you should find a job and work for it." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Your behavior towards me is unacceptable, and if you keep it up, we'll be heading for a divorce. The ball is in your court. I'm going out to have breakfast that I didn't make myself. Goodbye." Jake walked out of the kitchen, leaving a stunned Brooke behind. She had never seen him behave this way before. She immediately called Rufus in distress. "Rufus, Jake is becoming difficult to handle. I don't know what to do anymore." Rufus chuckled over the phone. "I expected this. Don't worry, I have a plan B." Jake was at his desk when his secretary informed him that he had a visitor. Confused, he asked if he had any appointments that day that he wasn't aware of. "No, sir, but she said it was urgent," the secretary replied. Sighing, Jake prepared himself for another problem. Ever since he gave Brooke the ultimatum, their relationship had been deteriorating rapidly. Her ultimatum had been no money, no affection. Jake simply responded, "Have it your way," and moved his things into the guest room. This was not something Brooke appreciated. She had a high desire for intimacy, but unfortunately Rufus was lacking in that area. He relied on medication to help him, but it wasn't enough to satisfy her needs. Coupled with his poor physical condition, she was left unsatisfied. Within a couple of weeks, she was desperate and tried in vain to seduce Jake into giving her the affection she craved. But now he had another problem to deal with. An elderly woman entered his office and asked for his identification. Once confirmed, she handed him 2 sealed envelopes, saying, "I'm sorry to say that you've been served." The woman shook her head and muttered to the secretary, "Please keep an eye on him." "It's really bad news." Jake stared at the envelopes, feeling a strange sense of relief. The die had been cast, and while he had expected it, it still hurt. What he didn't anticipate was the restraining order prohibiting him from contacting his wife, children, and parents. He was even more shocked to see the notarized affidavit claiming that he had a romantic relationship with Gemma Evans. With a heavy heart, he began the necessary legal processes. His bank accounts were frozen, and he started reaching out to his professional contacts to find a lawyer. While he didn't find one among them, a client who had gone through a similar experience directed him to her lawyer. Finally, he secured a small apartment for the immediate future. Back to the present, Brooke overheard Olivia and Brian speaking in hushed tones. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but it seemed like her son was facing some issue and wished he could talk to his dad about it. "Why don't you talk to your Uncle Rufus about it?" Brooke interrupted. Olivia scoffed. "What could that disgusting man say that would be helpful? He's always making inappropriate comments and offering money in exchange for things I won't even mention. And that's not even the worst of it." Taken aback, Brooke thought, "This is his own daughter and he knows it. If what she's saying is true, oh my goodness." That evening, Brooke discovered some disturbing truths about Rufus. She realized that he was a pervert and a danger to her and their children. Thankfully, Jake had instilled enough self-respect in the kids that nothing physical had happened. Now, the fact that she would soon be financially dependent on him became a major problem. Jake paid a significant amount in child support, which allowed her to live comfortably. But that was about to change, and she began to regret some of her decisions. "Leonard Daltrey, pleased to finally meet you. Gemma Evans. The feeling is mutual. I've heard so many great things about you, and I'm really excited to work with you." Professor Daltrey shared information about the university and his role in it. He also mentioned that he was a widower and currently living with his girlfriend. The welcoming conversation ended with Professor Daltrey saying, "I've arranged temporary accommodation with my good friend, Nathaniel Thompson. He has a guest house at St. Christopher's Path. If you're looking for something more comfortable, you should check out the houses at St. Christopher's Wood. There are some available near the lake, as well as some plots of land with building permits for university employees. It's worth mentioning that the best plot has already been taken by our part-time assistant. The professor looked thoughtfully and continued. Maybe I'll invite you to join us. The man is incredibly skilled with children who may need a little extra help or have some challenges. We recently built a special training center for them, and he played a big role in designing it to help them reach their full potential. It would mean a lot to me if he became one of the teachers there as well. However, he's quite private and hasn't been interested in my offer so far. Gemma was exploring the area around St. Christopher's Wood. After 2 months of getting used to her new surroundings, she decided that this was exactly where she wanted to stay for a while. She started looking for a nice house, and Nadia Thompson offered to help. Suddenly, they came across a sign that said land for sale with a building permit already granted. Gemma exclaimed, "What a beautiful place. I could definitely see myself living here. But who could design and build a house that fits in with this stunning environment?" Nadia grinned, "I know just the person. He's actually becoming a close friend of ours. He's an aeronautical engineer and a designer. You should see the house he designed for himself. He's even building it all by himself. He's a bit of a loner, but when he opens up, he's great company. I'll invite him over for dinner on Friday. You can meet him then, if you'd like." "I'd love to," Gemma replied with excitement. Meanwhile, at the Vandam residence, Granddad Brooke asked in a small voice. Rufus Vandam SR carefully studied the woman sitting across from him, the mother of his great-grandchildren, although not from his own bloodline. He was perceptive and noticed that she seemed very upset. "Yes, dear. What's bothering you? Do you happen to know where Jake is?" Brooke asked hesitantly. "Dear, I won't confirm or deny that. Why do you ask?" Having trouble in your relationship, Brooke was caught off guard and almost blurted out, "Yes," but stopped herself just in time. The old man noticed her reaction. It was time to confront her. In a firm tone, he continued, "Rufus has some negative traits, don't you think? And his obsession with those unhealthy substances doesn't help at all." Brooke stammered. "I don't know what you mean." Honestly, Rufus SR spoke sternly. "Don't play games with me, young lady. I may be old, but I'm not senile like my son and grandson think. I know those 2 beautiful children of yours don't have Jake's genes." "What? How dare you?" Brooke shouted. "Don't take that tone with me, young lady. I'm willing to bet everything I have on it. What color are your eyes?" "Blue. And Jake's?" "Green. And both of your children?" "Brown. That is highly unlikely genetically. They may look like Jake because he used to resemble Rufus. But Rufus has brown eyes and you spent a lot of time with him." Intimately, Brooke felt her world crashing down. She gripped the chair tightly, her knuckles turning white. She tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Granddad was unwavering. "You're on your own. You chose the wrong man and let him push the good one out of your life and your children's lives. Now that things aren't going as planned, you want Jake back. Whether I know where he is or not, I won't help you. Now leave." After Brooke left, Rufus SR stood by the window for a while, lost in thought. Maybe it's time for me to write that long letter, he mumbled to himself. 2 women were becoming friends since Gemma rented the guest house from the Thompson family, but Gemma had never been invited to their house before. As Gemma waited for the door to open, she looked around nervously. When the door finally opened, a man named Nathaniel or Nathan greeted her. "Oh, hi. You must be Gemma. I'm Nathan, but everyone calls me Nathan. Only Nadia calls me Nathaniel when she's mad at me. Please come in, Nadia is in the kitchen." Gemma was taken aback when she saw the scar on Nathan's face. As he led her to the kitchen, she noticed that he was fit but had a slight limp. She wondered what had happened to him. In the kitchen, Nadia warmly welcomed Gemma. Gemma introduced herself to Jacob, their son, and then asked Nadia, "This house and the surroundings are absolutely stunning. How did you find such an amazing place?" Nadia's expression faltered for a moment as memories rushed through her mind, trying to decide what to say. "It's a long, sad story with a happy ending, I suppose. I'll tell you about it someday, but it's also Nathan's story, and I want his approval to share it. Only a few people know the whole story. For now, I can say that Nathan fought hard to gain control of this land from some very controlling individuals, And Jacob isn't my son. He's Nathan's from his first marriage. Is he divorced? Before he met you? No, he's a widower. But I'm excited to tell you that we'll be welcoming another child into this house in 6 months. Gemma hugged Nadia enthusiastically. That's fantastic news. She wanted to ask when the baby was due, but Nathan interrupted. Gemma, may I introduce Jake? Gemma exclaimed. Without thinking, she ran over and hugged him. Jake didn't respond much, only saying, Gemma, long time no see. Confused, Gemma let go and looked at Nadia and Nathan. They exchanged looks and Nathan asked, do you two know each other? Before Gemma could answer, Jake said, we used to be friends. Gemma's excitement turned to disappointment and tears welled up in her eyes. This wasn't the joyful reunion she had hoped for. She cried, distressed. Jake, why are you acting so cold? Aren't you happy to see me? I missed you so much. Jake was surprised and even more confused. He looked at their hosts and Nathan simply nodded, saying, let's address this right away. You can use the office over there in the office. Jake looked at Gemma, his former friend and now very upset Gemma. He said, you told Brooke that we were intimate while I was still married to her. You even signed an affidavit. That ruined my marriage. Why would I be happy to see you? That lie hurt me deeply. Suddenly, Gemma understood the depth of the deception. She became furious with Brooke for manipulating Jake and tarnishing his reputation in the community where he lived. She sat up straight and with determination in her voice, she said to Jake, listen to me very carefully. Before I came here, I was in Europe for 3 years. I would never have said that to Brooke. I overheard her bragging about it one night, and I confronted her publicly right then and there. After that, I went to your parents to tell them what I had been doing for the past 3 years. I even spoke with your granddad. We had a long conversation together. He told me that you were doing well and that I might run into you here. I didn't expect it to be so soon, but I had already decided to find you. I truly missed you. Jake paled. But the affidavit, it's fake. And if you still have the original, someone is in big trouble. Jake, I loved you, and I still do, but I would never sleep with you while you were married. I would never betray you like that. All this time, I thought you had betrayed me. I wondered what I had done to deserve that. Do you believe me now? Of course. You just provided me with one verifiable fact, a call to my grandfather. I'm sure you can prove the rest just as easily. And most importantly, you've never lied to me before. So yes, I believe you. Gemma felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had overcome the first hurdle. Now, she had to figure out how to express her feelings for him. Would he feel the same way? She took a deep breath and gathered her courage, asking, can we make amends with a hug? As she pushed her chair back, Jake did the same, walked over to her, and embraced her, asking, can you forgive me for what? Gemma asked, indignant. You were manipulated in the worst way possible. There's nothing to forgive. Jake tried to hug Gemma, but she quickly turned her head and accidentally got close to each other, which was no less than a hug. Jake felt overwhelmed. Did you just hug me? Did that really happen? You hugged me, he asked, still taken aback. Yes. I've wanted to do that ever since I found out you weren't married to Brooke anymore. I already told her that I had a claim on you. Just let me know if I'm moving too fast, but whether it's slow or fast, I'm pursuing you. Jake thought about this while enjoying the feeling of Gemma's body against his. You know I have my own share of issues, right? There's a reason I'm building my house in such a remote location. I can only move forward slowly. I needed time to heal, and I've never had the courage to confront my demons. It's too painful. Let me be there for you. I'll stand by your side always. I know you married Brooke because she was pregnant, otherwise I would be your wife. And just to make things stranger, I did the math and I wonder if your son is really yours. There's something odd about it. But now, it's time to join our hosts. One more piece of advice. If you'd like, accept the job offer from Professor Daltrey. It would be good for you when they rejoined the others. Gemma simply said, problem solved. He's mine now, even if he's not fully convinced yet. Nadia clapped her hands happily. Great news. That was quick. What's next? Gemma leaned into Jake's side and pulled him close. She smiled and replied with immense happiness in her voice, I have some plans. One involves getting justice, another is never letting this amazing man out of my sight again, and lastly, who do I need to contact to buy that plot of land we saw this afternoon? Dinner was a joyful affair, full of laughter. Gemma shared stories from when they were friends, and after dinner, the conversation turned more serious. Gemma finally asked the difficult question, Jake, did Brooke ever explain how she gave birth to a fully developed son after only 6.5 months of pregnancy? No, she didn't. I never even realized that at the time because I was so overwhelmed. Looking back, it was foolish of me. But what are you implying? Nathan, having witnessed childbirth himself, answered gently, it's possible that the child isn't yours and that you were set up, but they look like me and they look like siblings too. There's no doubt about that. Jake stopped himself, afraid to voice more of his thoughts. Immediately, 2 women rushed towards him, offering their support and comforting words. Jake tried to compose himself and asked, what should I do now? I need to be certain. Nadia reached out and inquired, can you think of anyone who resembles you? Maybe a cousin. Gemma cried out, Rufus. It must be him. Jake responded, no, they don't even get along. Nadia dismissed his doubts. Or maybe that was just an act to prevent you from suspecting them. The only way to find out for sure is through an official paternity test. And for that, you'll need a great lawyer. I know just the person, Donna Marshall. She may not be one of the best, but she is the absolute best. Nathan, can you call her? Brooke was going through a difficult time. 2 weeks after Jake's grandfather made it clear that he wouldn't help her find Jake, she was still struggling to find a solution. She didn't want her children around Rufus anymore, but she still relied on him for financial support. While preparing dinner and her children were doing their schoolwork, there was a knock at the door. She looked through the peephole and saw a man and a woman standing outside. She opened the door and asked, how can I help you? The woman asked, are you Mrs. Paquette? Mrs. Brooke Paquette, previously married to Mr. Jacob Randall Vandam. Yes, that's me. What is this about? The man responded, I have a warrant. We need to collect DNA samples from your children. Failure to comply with this warrant may result in an arrest. What? Who? Why do you need DNA from my children for a paternity test? The woman explained simply, shattering Brooke's world. Brooke held onto a glimmer of hope that her children could be the reason Jake would come back to her. Another important reason was the financial support he provided. If he found out that the children were not his, that support would stop, and she would lose her comfortable lifestyle. Meanwhile, at the Vandam home, another set of medics, accompanied by a police officer, were knocking on Rufus Vandam's apartment door. Rufus SR observed the scene, realizing it seems Gemma found Jake and he has figured it out. There will be consequences. Rufus Jr. refused to cooperate and even attacked the police officer. The officer was no match for Rufus Jr.'s strength, and Rufus SR helplessly watched his grandson being escorted to the police car. 2 weeks later, Jake. The results are here, Gemma exclaimed, entering Jake's apartment. Gemma was anxious about the results since they could impact Jake's life, and she was prepared to support him through it all. Jake and Gemma sat on the couch, and as Jake read the document and accompanying lab results, his face turned pale. Concerned, Gemma leaned closer and asked, Jake, what's wrong? You look really upset. I'm not having a heart attack, but I'm going to make them pay. Both children belong to Rufus, and he and his devious ex-wife will face the consequences for everything they put me through. Gemma nestled against Jake, hoping to provide comfort. Although she desired more intimacy with him, she understood his need to resolve the situation first. They had shared moments of cuddling and occasional hugs, but nothing more. Gemma was craving closeness, but she also respected Jake's feelings and didn't want to rush him. She looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability and hesitance. Jake spoke with sincerity, Gemma, please understand that I love you deeply, but I regret allowing Brooke back into my life when you were away. I know you deserve more than what I can offer right now. Once this situation is resolved, I promise to give myself completely. But I don't want you to be entangled in the difficulties that lie ahead. Gemma felt relief wash over her like a soothing shower after a long day. She had witnessed Jake struggle to express his emotions in the past, and she cherished the love and sincerity within his words. She took a moment to cherish her own emotions. Gently, Gemma reached out and pulled Jake's head down to hug him. It was a soft and loving hug, filled with all the affection she had for this kind and beautiful man. For Jake, it felt like a sudden rush of electricity against his lips. He was stunned, both by the hug itself and by Gemma's willingness to be there for him. He hadn't responded to her advances yet, despite the strong connection they shared. Gemma's desires were beginning to build up inside her. Jake looked at her with a mix of shock and vulnerability in his eyes. "Gemma, please don't misunderstand me. I love you with all my heart, and I've been beating myself up for allowing Brooke back into my life. I understand that you have needs and desires, but I want to resolve this situation first. I don't want you to be a rebound. You deserve more, and I can't bear the thought of hurting you. If you don't have the patience for all of this and want to move on, I completely understand. I won't hold any hard feelings." Relief flooded Gemma like a cool breeze on a hot day. She knew how challenging it was for Jake to express his deepest emotions, and she recognized the profound love and commitment underlying his words. She allowed herself a few seconds to bask in these feelings. Gemma gently moved her hand from behind Jake's back and used it to draw his head closer, initiating another hug. It was tender and heartfelt, expressing her unwavering support and commitment to him. Jake wrapped his arms around Gemma, thinking to himself, "She smells absolutely amazing," he whispered shyly. "Can we delay building your house until this mess is resolved? By then, you might not need it anymore. I can renovate and expand my house to meet your wishes instead." Gemma was stunned. Did he just ask me to live with him? She decided to confirm. "Are you inviting me to come and live with you?" "Yes, I am. You've just shown me your commitment, and I want you to know that I am just as committed to you. If you want a traditional ring and ceremony, I'll gladly oblige. But for me, marriage is just words. If we promise to be faithful and dedicated to each other for life, that's all that matters. Yes, I want a ring. I want a ring to symbolize our love and commitment. A simple, plain, golden wedding ring would be perfect. I'd love for you to have the same one. And maybe, after everything is settled, we can jump over a broom together as a meaningful celebration." Later that week, Jake and Gemma sat in Donna Marshall's office. Jake explained that he wanted revenge, but Donna explained that she may not be the right person to help. He needed someone assertive and strategic, someone who could navigate difficult situations. However, Donna knew another lawyer, a colleague who had faced a similar situation and despised those who preyed on others. They referred clients to each other and sometimes worked together on cases. Sometime later, Brooke was going about her household chores, trying to convince herself that everything would blow over after the DNA tests. She had found ways to keep her children away from Rufus and was grateful for her father's support after she confided in him. Rufus Jr.'s fear of his grandfather had kept him away from his apartment ever since the police took him. Suddenly, her peace was shattered by loud knocks on the front door. Reluctantly, Brooke approached the door and opened it. Before her stood Rufus, his face red with anger and his body trembling. He yelled, while waving some crumpled papers, "What is this?" Brooke took a step back, feeling a wave of fear wash over her. "I don't know. What does it say?" Rufus shouted, "That arrogant brother of yours is demanding an insane amount of money for raising my children. He seized all my assets to force me to comply." Brooke stumbled back into her house and collapsed into a chair. She felt a deep sense of dread. Jake was awake and seeking justice. Now that he knew the children weren't his, there would be consequences. If he came after her as well, she would be completely ruined. She realized that her luxurious lifestyle was about to crumble. Rufus Jr. continued to rant when there was another knock on the door. Brooke tried to ignore it, but the knocking grew more insistent. With a heavy sigh, she got up and walked to the door. Opening it, she saw a small man with round spectacles and a mustache, resembling Professor Calculus from Tintin. Behind him stood a woman with a camcorder, indicating it was recording. The man asked, "Are you Mrs.?" Brooke Paquette Brooke confirmed her identity, and he handed her an envelope, saying, "You've been served. Have a good day," before walking back to their car. Brooke watched them until they disappeared around the corner. She closed the door, turned around, and slowly made her way back to her chair. The dread turned into a swirling vortex of fear. She opened the envelope and her fear intensified as she read the documents. There were DNA tests proving that Jake wasn't the father of either of the children, but his brother was. The next documents were demands for reimbursement for the money she received as child support, including interest and various other requests, because she made him believe that the children are his and lured him into marriage on false accusations. The demands totaled a significant amount of money. There was another one from Gemma Evans for falsifying an affidavit and one for slander. Brooke panicked until Rufus told her that the company would cover her expenses now that the truth was out. She was the mother of his children after all, right? Later that evening, Brooke attended the family dinner. Rufus Jr. started to explain that they developed feelings for each other, and Brooke was his girlfriend now. He would take care of the children after their lawyers defended against the absurd demands of his brother and his partner. Softly, his grandfather interrupted. "You have to find your own lawyer. The company won't pay for you and your unfaithful girlfriend's deceit. Jake has already suffered enough because of you." Silence filled the table. What? Jake's father shouted. "Why not? He's allowed to defend himself against those false allegations, isn't he? The company has very capable lawyers to counter this slander." Rufus Sr. replied, "First, the allegations are not false, they're completely true. The kids are from Rufus and Brooke. They've been cheating on Jake from the beginning, and it seems that Jake has DNA proof that the children are not his, but Rufus. If that's the case, Jake has a valid point. Also, the company has strict rules about relationships, and you both broke them. So, if the lawyers are going to work, it's not to fight Jake, but to enforce the company rules you both broke while Jake was married to Brooke." Rufus' father exploded. "You can't do that. I'm the CEO, not you." Rufus Sr. chuckled softly and answered, "But I hold 70% of the shares of this company. I am the chairman of the board of directors. The board of directors can dismiss any decision the CEO makes. That means our legal team is not to be used for a lost battle against a lawsuit just to satisfy your ego." Rufus Jr. erupted with anger, kicked his chair across the room, and stormed out. In the hallway, he stood still, panting and trying to catch his breath. Rufus Sr. dropped his napkin, excused himself, and followed Jr. out of the dining room. In the hallway, he almost felt sorry for the wreck of a man, until he remembered what he did to his brother. He walked past and said softly but in a firm, venomous tone, "If I find out that you try to harm your brother again, I will make sure you face severe consequences. Understand?" Rufus Jr. was momentarily taken aback by the attack. Then his ego and arrogance took over, and he growled back, "And how do you plan to do that, old man? I have influential friends too. Just try me, and you will discover that this old dog still has bite." With that, Jake's grandfather walked past and lightly patted the still heavily breathing man on the back, saying, TSK, you must take care of that condition of yours. Otherwise, you'll never get old." In his apartment, he sat behind his desk, took his old and trusted Rolodex, and looked up the phone number of the University of St. Christopher's Crossing. The next morning, at breakfast, Rufus Sr. was bombarded by his son Randall and Rufus Jr. with requests to use the company's legal advisors. After thoroughly examining the documents, they both understood that this legal battle would be costly, and the only way to win was to drag it out as long as possible, hoping that Jake would run out of money. Unfortunately for them, the old man stuck to his decision and even strengthened it, saying, "If I even suspect that you asked a lawyer from the company for advice, you will be fired immediately. It's an abuse of company resources. Do you understand?" He scolded the two men as he walked out of the dining room. Behind his desk, he called the university. "Good morning, this is Professor Vandam. I would like to speak with Professor Daltrey if he's available. I would be much obliged." Within minutes, he heard the familiar voice saying, "Rufus, old friend. I haven't heard from you in too long. How are you?" Rufus Sr. smiled but answered gravely, "Mentally, I'm doing well. Physically, not so much. But that's a topic for another time. I need a favor that involves two people." "Always, my friend. You supported me during that unpleasant incident with that short fellow who was blackmailing students at the university. You always had my back. Now, it's my turn to repay the favor. I don't think you'll like it, Leon. I will come and visit you to try to recruit 2 of your employees for my company. I don't have any other choice." Which two? Jake Vandam and Gemma Evans. "Ouch," Leon said. "I understand your grandson, but Ms. Evans, I had a conversation with Ms. Evans, and she told me that she heard some rumors about Jake's marriage and some dishonesty. She came to the house to clarify things and mentioned that she wanted to find Jake now that he's divorced. Seeing the chaos in my family, she has found him, and I strongly believe they are now inseparable." You wouldn't be wrong. When shall I expect you? I ask so I can make them available when you want to speak with them. It's a 2-hour drive. I can leave within 30 minutes. I would like you to be there too. Is that possible? I'll make it happen. You seem to be in a hurry. I am Rufus SR. Simply answered. See you in a few hours. Later that day, Leon was shocked by the appearance of his old friend. He looked frail and tired, but his voice was strong and his eyes still sparkled. Before Leon invited Jake and Gemma into his office, the two older men had an intense conversation. Jake, Gemma, Leon, and Rufus SR were sitting in Leon's office. The reunion between Jake and his grandfather was bittersweet. Regret for the time lost and happiness because they could finally embrace each other again. Introductions were unnecessary. Rufus SR began immediately. Jake, would you like to come and take over the company for me? Stunned, Jake asked. But Granddad, why? And what about Dad and Rufus? Rufus gave a sad smile as he replied, I am ill, and my condition is getting worse. I am reaching the point where I won't be able to defend the company against the terrible duo who are currently running it into the ground. I know from firsthand experience that you are capable of leading the company. I've seen you in action. Jake looked shocked and grabbed Gemma's hand. I don't know what to say. Why didn't you tell me? I had my reasons, Jake. But can you answer my question? Of course, your girlfriend's opinion also matters. But I'm building a house, a family home, here for both of us. Granddad, Gemma's head shot up, and she looked at Jake. A family home? Who's talking about taking it slow now? Jokingly, she interjected, should I stop taking my birth control pills? Without missing a beat, Jake replied, as soon as possible. I would love to have a few children of our own, if you're willing to help me with that. Gemma leaped out of her chair and hugged Jake passionately in front of the other two men, saying, I took the last one last night. Is that answer clear enough? Rufus's voice interrupted the happy moment. Jake and Gemma, please remember that you are still in an office. Oh, and Jake, the company's offices are less than an hour away from here. Jake looked into Gemma's eyes. Gemma nodded almost imperceptibly, signaling to Jake that they should accept Rufus's offer to run the company. Jake turned to his grandfather. What about my dad and brother? Leave that to me. Once you take over, they won't be able to cause you any more trouble. You're not the only one who holds a grudge. When do you want me to take over? So, you'll do it? Take over the company? It makes me so happy. Yes, Granddad will do it. But when I'm nearing the end of my life, soon the symptoms will become visible and the pain will be unbearable. Leon's wife passed away horribly, so he founded a small private clinic for a peaceful passing. I plan to go there in about 10 days, possibly sooner. Jake pondered silently as Gemma asked, but why all the secrecy? I suspect that Randall and Rufus will stop at nothing to maintain their lifestyle, even resorting to violence. Jake is already a thorn in Rufus's side, and I had to threaten him when he wanted to use the company's lawyers to fight the lawsuits Jake initiated. Leon interjected. We came up with a plan to protect both of you from Randall and Rufus. He looked at his old friend and asked, shall I explain, or would you like to do it? Rufus SR replied, you go ahead, I'm getting tired. Leon continued, as soon as Rufus passes away, a message will be sent to some trusted managers in the company's office, workshop, and factory. They will initiate a lockdown of the entire company. I will develop a software program, similar to ransomware, to accomplish this. Employees will be sent home during this time, with full pay, of course. We've made all the necessary arrangements. Jake and Gemma were taken aback by the scale of the operation. Jake asked, and what will be our role in all of this? Naturally, you will be informed, but until the reading of the will, you don't have to do anything. That's when everything will be revealed, and you can officially take over the company. By then, Randall and Rufus will be the least of your worries. Jake's grandfather let out a tired sigh. That has already been taken care of. He looked up at Jake and said, I will write you a letter explaining everything. For now, it's best for you to remain in the dark about the details. Granddad, may I visit you at the clinic? Jake asked, his voice quivering. No, son, it's best to let me go peacefully. It won't be a pleasant sight, and I want to be alone when I meet my maker. This is goodbye for us. Just one more thing, please take good care of your mother. She is, just like you, an innocent party in all of this, I promise, grandfather. We'll take care of Mom. With that, they said their goodbyes, and a very emotional Jake with Gemma in tow, left for home. At Jake's apartment, it took a while for both Jake and Gemma to process this sad news. After some time, Jake took a deep breath and said, "I'm going to miss the old man. He was like a father to me, even more than my own father." He only had eyes for Rufus. The only response Gemma could offer was a comforting hug. She whispered, "I know." 2 weeks later, Jake had just finished negotiations with a contractor to finish their house in the woods. Right after, the sad news came. He wanted to have the house finished as soon as possible, so Nathan recommended a contractor who was known for being quick, delivering quality work, and reliable. After deciding to stay together, Jake redesigned the house and made it much bigger. Now it would have 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and all the necessary amenities. The house would be powered by deep geothermal heating, with energy coming from solar panels and wind turbines. Jake sat in front of the house, holding the sad news in his hands, when Gemma arrived. She tried to console him, but it was difficult. Jake felt like a part of him had been taken away. The next day, they were summoned by the lawyer to attend the reading of the will. Jake went with Gemma and prepared himself for what was to come. He noticed, however, that he was being followed by a black car. He swiftly parked his car in a mall parking lot and prepared to exit when the black car pulled up next to them. A woman got out and signaled for Jake to lower his window. Cautiously, Jake lowered the window with the car still running and his foot hovering over the accelerator. The woman showed her ID and said, "Sir, we're FBI agents and we're here to protect you until this matter is resolved. When you arrive at the reading, please act as if you are unaware of our presence. All will be explained at the reading, as per Mr. Vandam's wishes." Jake walked into the conference room, leaving Gemma behind in the waiting room. Inside, he found his father, mother, and Rufus Jr. already seated. Rufus Jr. sneered, "Look, the prodigal son comes to see if there's anything for him here. Well, I'll make sure you get nothing, you little rat." The lawyer interrupted, "Sir, behave yourself or I will have you removed." "Do you understand?" Rufus tried to say something else, but the lawyer, with force in his voice, said again, "Sir, control yourself. Next time you can wait outside. Do you understand me? And I require a verbal response." Rufus muttered something under his breath and the lawyer continued, "I can't hear a word you're saying. Do you or do you not understand that any further disruption will result in your removal from the premises?" Rufus wanted to object, but an upheld hand stopped him. He recognized that this lawyer was not to be messed with. "Now that we have the nonsense out of the way, we can begin with the official part," the lawyer stated firmly. As the lawyer spoke, Jake's mind was suddenly filled with an image of Gandalf, the wizard from the Lord of the Rings. The lawyer had the same presence. Kind and gentle, but capable of unleashing swift consequences for those who provoked him. Jake snapped back to reality just in time to hear his name being called. "All my possessions, as listed in this office, are to be inherited by my only son Jacob Randall Vandam, who will also become the new chairman of the board of Vandam Aeronautical Industries." What does Granddad mean by only son? That's Dad, isn't it? What's happening? Jake thought, bewildered. Jake's mother sat calmly in her chair with a slight smile on her face. Meanwhile, Randall and Rufus exploded. "I'm his son, and Rufus is my son. I'll tear you apart, you fraud." Randall shouted at the lawyer. The lawyer didn't flinch and pressed a button. Within seconds, 4 men entered the room. They looked like they could easily overpower anyone, and they positioned themselves next to the angered men. One of them growled at Randall, "You don't want to make me hurt you, do you?" Sir Randall immediately deflated, but Rufus, lacking self-restraint, attempted to reach Jake while shouting, "I'm going to harm you, you jerk." In an instant, Rufus was back in his seat, his face filled with pain as he rubbed his thumb and wrist. Once some semblance of calm was restored, the lawyer continued, "My dear friend Rufus predicted this unpleasant scene, which is why he asked these men to be present and maintain peace." He looked at Randall and said, "Mr. Vandam has evidence proving that you are not his son. He did not divorce your mother without reason. Therefore, Rufus Jr. is not his grandson." The lawyer paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. He continued relentlessly, still looking at Randall, "When Rufus learned about how you mistreated your wife, and when he discovered that you used company funds to lease an apartment and be entertained by the employees of an escort service, he made an offer to your wife. She willingly accepted he had your wife inseminated with his sperm, and she became pregnant with Jacob Randall Van Dam. We have notarized affidavits confirming this, along with genetic evidence that Jacob Randall Van Dam is the other son of Anna Van Dam Hansen and Rufus Van Dam. Randall appeared on the verge of exploding, and indeed he did. He lunged at his wife, shouting, "You cheated on me, you unfaithful woman. You're going to pay for this. I'll sell you to a lady of the night in Russia. I'll have you harmed in the most awful way." The lawyer interrupted, gesturing for the men to restrain Randall. At the same time, Rufus resembled a suffocating goldfish. The lawyer addressed the men, saying, "Please add this behavior and the threats to the record." And to Randall, "You will do no such thing. We have evidence of significant embezzlement committed by you and your son. You stole around $6 million from the company to fund your debauched lifestyle, not to mention the money you stashed away in the Cayman Islands. Furthermore, you sold sensitive technology to rogue nations and competitors. As a result, government agencies responsible for the security and safety of our country, along with the IRS and the FBI, wish to investigate both of you. Whether you like it or not, you will assist them with their inquiries." He looked at the 4 men restraining Randall and Rufus and instructed them, "Please escort these individuals out and hand them over to the authorities." Brooke was waiting outside. She saw Jake and Gemma walk out together. Gemma kept her promise, with Jake's arm possessively wrapped around her. Half an hour later, Brooke's world crumbled when she witnessed Rufus and his father being escorted out, read their rights, and driven away in separate cars. What happened here? Brooke wondered, panic welling up inside her. A few seconds later, the panic gripped her, and she approached one of the men escorting the father and son, ultimately handing them over to the police. "I can't say for certain, ma'am, but they are assisting the authorities with their investigation, and it will likely take a long time," the man explained. Another man added, "It appears that they are wanted for fraud, embezzlement, industrial espionage, and sharing sensitive technology with forbidden countries. I doubt we will see them again for at least 20 years. "But who will run Van Dam Industries if they're not available?" Brooke asked, the hollow pit in her stomach deepening. "The other man. The one who walked in with that emblem on his arm," the man replied. Suddenly, Brooke felt detached from reality. She didn't know what had transpired inside the office, but Jake had come out on top. The luxurious life and the protection Rufus promised her were gone. Feeling depressed, she walked toward Rufus' car, only to find it unlocked with the key fob sitting in the center console. Turmoil filled her as she drove home. Months later, Brooke was at her wit's end. Her meager income was nowhere near enough to provide for her household's needs, let alone the luxuries she had grown accustomed to in her previous life. She knew she had to come up with a plan to either increase her income or reduce her expenses. The children's tuition was a particular source of worry. The only solution she could see was convincing Jake to take care of the children, and that meant she had to win him over and lure him away from Gemma. She stood in front of the mirror, completely oblivious to the toll her body had taken. During her time with Rufus, she had indulged in excessive partying, heavy drinking, and even substances to cope with the demands he placed on her body. At Rufus' request, she had undergone various plastic surgeries to enhance her appearance, including a tummy tuck, chest lift and enlargement, facelift, and lip fillers. The overall result was that she lost her natural look that had attracted Jake in the first place. Now she looked like that singer Cher, but without the healthy glow. Brooke's skin was somewhat loose and artificial. Her body wasn't normal, which didn't attract so many men, and her face, belly, and legs were the wrong kind of smooth. All this was overlooked by Brooke, and she was confident that she would be able to replace that inappropriate person, Gemma, without any problems. Early in the morning, Brooke sat in her car. She had it parked strategically so that she could see who would leave the house. If it was Jake, she would drive off and come back another time. If it was that inappropriate person, she would wait a few minutes to ensure that there was little chance that Gemma would return, and then she would go knocking on that door and reclaim her husband. Suddenly, she saw the blue Nissan Rogue appear and, in a flash, disappear around the corner. She checked her makeup one more time, waited 5 minutes, stepped out of the car, and walked over to the front door. Brooke had heard that Jake designed and partly built the house himself. She forced herself to take a good look so she knew what to compliment on. She could always manipulate him into changing it into something more to her taste. The house seemed to have grown out of the hill. It sat low on the top, the front facing the north. Its rather small face showed two large windows next to the door, the blinds closed. Brooke took a deep breath, pulled her shirt a bit down to enhance her cleavage, pulled the door knocker backwards and let go. The knock reverberated through the house and Brooke waited and waited. Just when she wanted to turn around, the door opened silently and Jake showed himself. He looked her over, his face expressionless, but saying nothing. He was definitely not inviting her in. Brooke squared her shoulders, forcing her chest to strain against the thin fabric of her dress, and finally said in a sultry voice, "Hello, Jake. You're looking good. Life is treating you well. I see, Brooke. Somehow I've been expecting to hear from you. What do you want?" "I want us to talk." "Aren't you inviting me?" And Jake sighed. "Let's get it over with, for once and for all," he thought. "Come on in," then he replied wearily. He led her into his office. It was closest to the door, and he didn't want Brooke to appraise the rest of the house. Jake had a good idea as to why she showed up. He gestured to her to sit and took his chair at the other side of his desk and said, "Okay, Brooke, talk. What do you want from me? Aren't you going to show me the rest of the house? No, why should I? Now, will you tell me why you are here?" "Jake, don't you understand? We belong to each other. We have history and 2 children together. Now I need you to come back to me." Jake looked at Brooke, his mind churning. What is happening here? Is she going crazy? Out loud he said, "We do have history, indeed. But my recollection of that history seems to differ a lot from yours. You must be out of your mind, thinking that you and I will ever be together again." Jake's answer didn't seem to faze Brooke one bit. "I'll admit, I made a mistake, but there are still the children to consider. I can't provide for them properly. They're not mine. I have compelling evidence that they are from my half-brother. So why should I? You raised them for the longest time and did a very good job at it. Rufus had never been able to properly take care of them." Jake sighed and replied, "Don't you worry. I'll take care of them. Only because my mother, their grandmother, asked me to. She begged me to take care of them, so I made provisions for them in such a way that you can't get your greedy hands on the money. I'm definitely not willing to enhance your lifestyle." Brooke became aggravated. This was not how she had envisioned this conversation. Jake had always been malleable to her needs, and she conveniently had forgotten what had happened just before their divorce. Now she ran into a wall. She wanted him to take care of her children and herself. She tried a different approach. "Jake," she crooned, "I know I wronged you, but that was all to the influence of Rufus. Now he is out of the picture. We can be very good for each other. Think about what I can do for you. Dump that uptight person and come back to me. We can live the good life. The 4 of us, as the family we were." Jake was silent for a few moments, and Brooke thought she was winning the battle. She suggestively changed her posture. It had the opposite effect on the man in front of her. "You're looking and acting like a bad woman. Our history makes me think that I should avoid you at all times. I'm not going to touch you, not even when wearing a hazard suit. As for your children, I arranged living quarters at St. Christopher's Crossing since Olivia will go to college there. Brian will live with his grandmother until he goes to college too. You will not be able to take proper care of him, nor provide proper housing, therefore I took care of that. You, however, will not receive a cent from me. In reality, you have an outstanding debt to me." Jake was silent for a minute, and Brooke was absolutely stunned by his outburst. Then he went on, "If you try to fight this, I will file a complaint for fraud and extortion, telling the authorities that the children weren't mine and that you ripped me off during the divorce because of that. Now get out. I've had enough." When Jake fell silent, they both heard the door open. Gemma peeked around the corner and Jake said, "Come on in. My visitor is about to leave." A radiant Gemma with a very obvious baby bump entered. She almost strutted over to Jake and hugged him. She whispered softly so that Brooke wasn't able to hear, "My suspicions were correct. There are 2 of them." When Jake's smile got bigger and bigger, Brooke couldn't contain herself anymore. "You are pregnant," she cried out loud, seeing her plans for her and Jake going up in smoke. Gemma and Jake looked at each other, and Jake gave an almost imperceptible nod. Gemma turned to Brooke and said, "Yes, I'm pregnant. I'm giving Jake his own children. The children he deserved for such a long time. Now I heard that you were leaving? We need to make plans, redecorating the room for the children." Suddenly it clicked for Brooke. Children? You mean? Gemma's face lit up. Yes, I'm expecting twins. I'm 3 months pregnant. I became suspicious when my belly started to swell so soon. The first ultrasound didn't show both fetuses because one was hiding behind the other. This ultrasound showed 2 and their gender. She hugged Jake hard and whispered, "Boys," Brooke said, "you can't do that to me, throwing me to the curb, taking away my children, your niece and nephew." Jake thought it was time to drop all pretenses of civility and replied in a tone Brooke knew too well, but Gemma had to experience yet. "I don't know what Olivia and Brian are to me. You tell me, and bear in mind that Randall wasn't the biological son of Rufus S.R. And I'm not the biological son of Randall, but from Rufus S.R. We share the same mother, though. Since Randall and Rufus Jr. were arrested, Brooke hadn't talked to them. Anna refused any reconciliation and wanted to have nothing to do with her. It dawned on Brooke that she was well and truly isolated and left to her own. She had no decent work, lived in a sleazy apartment for which she had to sell her valuables, one at a time. She let her head hang down and almost missed that Jake was talking again. "If it was up to me, you can rot in hell. But my mother and Gemma are convinced that if I do that, you'll be a quivering wreck of a human being. I don't mind that. But again, they told me that you are still the mother of your children, and they might feel obliged to take care of you, and that would come at a cost I don't want them to pay. Therefore, I arranged a job for you. Simple physical work. It will pay for the rent and the basic cost of living." Brooke had already applied for several jobs, only to be rejected firsthand every time. To get a job, she would have to look somewhere far away, and she wouldn't be able to see her children at all. Jake handed her a card with an address and a telephone number, while Gemma said, "This is your one and only chance to keep in contact with your children, because it's the only job there is for you after the lawsuits are before the judge. If you don't take it, we will withdraw our hands from you. And we're not taking your children away. It's by their own choice that Olivia is going to live in St. Christopher's Crossing and Brian with Anna. They are well aware of what you did to what they thought was their father." Now Gemma gestured to Brooke that it was time to leave. In front of the door, she said to Brooke, "In the end, I win. I have Jake and I am going to have his babies. Your selfishness ruined Jake for you. You gambled on the wrong man for some perceived luxury. I have the better man, and you have nothing." Gemma gave Brooke a hard look and continued, "I warn you. If you try something with Jake, you'll find me in your way. If you try to manipulate your children and try to set them up against him or hurt Jake in whatever way, I'm coming for you, and I will not stop until you are completely destroyed." Do you understand? Brooke's mouth fell open by the unveiled threats and the raw animosity Gemma exuded. "Answer me. Do you understand? You've hurt Jake enough, and this will stop here and now." "Do you understand what I am saying?" Brooke said very forcefully, almost shouting. In a small voice, Brooke replied, "Yes, I understand. No direct contact with Jake, only via you, yes. And now get out." The Brooke who stood so confident in front of the mirror a few hours ago was no more. During the last 45 minutes, her world had crashed. Broken Brooke walked to her car. Inside, Gemma snuggled herself in Jake's lap. She sighed, "You're mine. It took me almost 20 years to get here, but we are together again." Despite Brooke and thanks to her stupidity, after a moment, she stood up and grabbed Jake's hand, saying, "We need to rehearse." "Rehearse? Rehearse what?" Jake inquired. "For the third act, silly," she replied with a laugh, leading him towards the bedroom.